In this episode, the first David Coverdale solo album, Whitesnake.
Hello, good evening and welcome to the latest edition of Crushed Custard. And today we'll be taking a look at the first solo album made by David Coverdale for the Purple Records label after the breakup of Deep Purple in 1976. Now this is a really special album for me because I was just getting into all the big music and the Purple stuff around the back end of 79 and 1980 and stuff, and it's been documented on other episodes how I discovered that this band in their charts, who I like so much, called Whitesnake, with their single Fall for Your Love, were actually half a Deep Purple at one point, and that got me on all into that road. It also got me, of course, into the road of collecting up all the solo albums, and at that same time, as can be witnessed by an embarrassing photograph or two that I'll share up in the corner here, or here, depending where it turns out. At the time I was going through I'm going to be the next David Coverdale phase, which of course, as you can see, didn't actually materialise. And so, when I got my hands on his two solo albums, Whitesnake and North Winds, that were far more, they weren't quite as heavy, if you like, as the Purple and the Whitesnake. And to be honest, most of the people who were into Whitesnake and the type of music that I was listening to at the time, they weren't interested in them. They were too weedy, they were too girly, if you like, for them. They weren't rocky enough. But for me, they were great, and I must have played them. I must have played them at least once every single day or night for a good 3 years at least, trying to pick up all the little hints about how to sing the songs. Of course, somebody should have come and told me that I couldn't sing in tune in the first place, and that would have saved me 3 years of wasting my time. But anyway, that is a different story. So here is that particular album. Then, now let's get one thing straight away. It's not called Whitesnake. It is called Whitesnake. As you can see from the cover and from the back, it is two separate words at this point. This was not at that point in his head to become a band. It was just the title of the album. There's a track on here called Whitesnake, and that is why the album's called Whitesnake. That's the title. So it's called Whitesnake, not Whitesnake, as a lot of people tend to try and call it these days. Another interesting thing for me is my copy. It's actually from France. It's a French copy on the Vogue label. There you go. So that's it. David Coverdale, Whitesnake. Nice inner sleeve as well, as you can see, with the lyrics on, and a couple of live pictures taken from the final Deep Purple tour. So how did this album come about then? Well, what you've got to remember is that 1976, the Mark IV version of Deep Purple was staggering around the world like some sort of wounded beast, sort of playing shows that on the odd night were brilliant, but a lot of the times were just a farce. A lot of the time with Tommy Murray not being able to play, maybe one or two people not being all that interested, maybe somebody else being far more interested in their own antics, and it was just a little bit of a disaster. When it all finally ground to a halt at the Liverpool Empire, I think it was in March 1976, that was it. They come off the stage and John Lord said he'd had enough. Apparently Coverdale said I've had enough as well. And that was it. That was the end of it. Now, the situation for Coverdale then, of course, was he'd only been in Deep Purple for 2 or 3 years, and only made 3 albums, and he hadn't got this sort of rock god status, if you like, that he's got now. So he must have been thinking, you know what, 3 years ago I was flogging dodgy trousers in a boutique in Redcar. I could be back doing that again next week if I don't watch it. Because there was no guarantees, especially with punk just about to come and take everything over, and you got disco there as well, and all sorts of stuff. This was a bloke who was, 25, and he was almost being heralded as a rock dinosaur, because that type of music, nobody wanted it anymore. So, what did he do? Well, for tax purposes and things, wasn't allowed to work in the UK. wasn't allowed to play live either. So he took himself off on what he referred to as a temporary sojourn to Germany to write a solo album. Now, just because Coverdale couldn't work in Britain didn't mean that the people that were recording the album couldn't. And so that's what happened. Roger Glover, the former bass player of Deep Purple, of course, before David Coverdale joined, he'd now taken over as a sort of A&R person at Purple Records and was doing a lot of record producing, was down to produce Coverdale's solo album. So he got together a really good bunch of musicians, including, of course, Mickey Moody, who was later to become a part of Whitesnake and also co-wrote one or two of the tracks on this album. Also, a young Simon Phillips on the drum stool. Got Delon Harper was there on the bass. I think Tim Hinkley was playing the keyboards, and of course you got the A-listers of backing vocals in there with the likes of Barry St John and Helen Chappelle and Lisa Strike and co. So you're sort of starting to get an idea what the album is going to be like. Now, they all did their recording bits in England. Coverdale put his vocals on sometime later in Germany. Now, before we get into the album in a little bit of detail, there's a couple of interesting things that sort of cross over, and it's not 100% clear when they happen. Now, there were two other albums going on at the same time as this. The first one of them is this one. Now, this one is a Barbie Benton solo album, which was produced by Roger Glover. And not only was it produced by Roger Glover, but it's got a lot of the musicians that were on David Coverdale's solo album on it, plus David Coverdale co-wrote one of the songs on it as well. So I think it's fairly safe to say there may have been some sort of, maybe even a crossover period, or straight after, or just before the Coverdale backing tracks were done. These Barbie Benton ones were done as well, because there's, again, every possibility, I would guess, that the Barbie Benton vocals were put on separately to when the band did their bit. And I think Mickey Moody is on here as well. The third album to throw in the mix, which came out a little bit later again, was this one. And that's Young and Moody, which is an album by Bob Young, the harmonica player, if you like, from Status Quo, the bloke who was always around with Status Quo, wrote quite a few songs for them and stuff, but wasn't actually a part of the band, and the aforementioned Mickey Moody. Now, this album was again recorded with a lot of those people on it at around the same time, and initially David Coverdale wrote a couple of songs for it, but they didn't end up on the album and only came out at a later date. So I've got a funny feeling that these two albums and this one, the David Coverdale one, all the backing tracks on these may all have been put down at roughly the same sort of time, I would guess, but I haven't got anything to prove that other than just a bit of intuition, man. Maybe thinking, well, sounds about right, and looking at all the names and everything and the way things happened, I would guess there wasn't a great deal of time in between them. So anyway, before Coverdale decided to make this solo album, he did get quite a few, maybe tenuous, if you like, job offers. Now, how many of these are actually happened, and how many are just figments of people's imagination, I don't know. There was a suggestion that he was going to join Pace Ashton Lord, which would have made that a bit of a strange group with two keyboard players and two vocalists, and I probably thought, I don't know, I want to be sharing lead vocal duties again. I've just done that with Glenn Hughes for 3 years, and it got to be a bit of a pain in the neck at times. Also, Coverdale claims that the band would actually have been called Clap. That's one. He was also invited to join Uriah Heep. Now, I think this got as far as actually going down and having a bit of a jam with them. Depending on whose side of it is correct, the suggestions were that Coverdale felt it was too much like Deep Purple and he didn't want to do it because it was the same or too similar, and Uriah Heep just decided it wasn't quite what they wanted. So, I don't know. Either way, to me, without being disrespectful to Uriah Heep, who are a band I like, I've got all their albums, but I've always thought of them as sort of just a little bit under Purple. I'm sure that would have been seen by a lot of people as maybe a backward step, I don't know. But anyway, That didn't happen. There's also a lot of rumours in the newspapers that he was about to replace Ozzy Osbourne in Black Sabbath, which is again quite ironic considering he's about the only Deep Purple vocalist that hasn't been in Black Sabbath. But again, I just can't see Coverdale doing fairies wear boots and war pigs and things like that. It was hard enough contemplating Gillan singing those, and he did it well. But somehow, no, Coverdale singing war pigs doesn't do it for me. So it was off to write a solo album. As we said, the backing tracks done in the UK, the vocals done in Germany. So what was it like then? Well, if you've never heard it, I would say to you, if you haven't heard it, get out and get a listen to it, because it is very, very different to anything else he's done. He's never done another album similar to this at all. If you've heard North Winds, it's almost the perfect morph, if you like, between Come Taste the Band and North Winds. Because by the time it gets to North Winds, everything's getting a little bit straighter. It's still very melodic and very soulful and not as heavy as Whitesnake was going to turn out, but it's lost a little bit of the quirkiness, if you like, that is on this album, because there are one or two tracks on here that are completely out of the window for Coverdale type stuff. It opens up with a track called Lady, which is basically just pretty much a continuation from Deep Purple, Really Come Taste That Band. It's probably a little bit more sort of laid back in its production and stuff, but it's almost Lady Luck Part 2 in some ways. But it's a great way to start the album. It's brilliant, and it stems back from the days when Coverdale's lyrics were still totally palatable, rather than getting just that little bit too far into the world of Frankie Howard innuendo, and coming out with lines like curses with a matalo tongue is something that the 2000s David Coverdale would never have been able to do, I don't think. So it's a great way to start the album. Then, of course, we move on to track 2. Now, depending on where you're coming from with this track, you either love it or you think it's a rip-off of Free. It isn't a rip-off of Free. It's a homage to Free, more than anything, if you like. It is a very Free type track, but David Coverdale is a very Paul Rodgers type singer, in the same way that lots of other people use. Paul Rodgers is very much like Otis Redding in some ways, and David Coverdale is very much like Scott Walker in other ways. Everybody takes things from somewhere else, so I don't really see why the track Blind Man gets it in the neck for being a complete rip-off of Free. Yes, it's very similar to Be My Friend or Don't Say You Love Me or something like that, but there are 100 other tracks by 100 other bands that are similar to tracks by other bands as well, so that shouldn't take away from it. We recorded it, of course, on the Ready and Willing album with Whitesnake a couple of years later. Personally, I prefer the one on Ready and Willing, which a lot of people don't. A lot of people prefer this one. This one is more, I don't know how you describe it. This one is more sort of laid back and whatever, whereas the Whitesnake one is much tighter with a band feel. This one sort of meanders a little bit towards the end and all that sort of stuff. But it is great. I think the vocal on the Ready and Willing version is better. I think any track that's got Ian Pace and John Lord on it, and Bernie Marsden as well, is going to be better than one that hasn't. But that doesn't take away from any of the musicians that played on this. And of course you've got the added bonus on here if you've got sorts of string arrangements and backing vocalists and all sorts of stuff. Then we go on to the one that is probably the quirkiest of the lot, which is a track called Goldie's Place. Now, subject-wise, it's right down Coverdale's High Street, really, because it's about a brothel. But it's done in a very sort of jazz bar, sort of jazz funk soul-y sort of way. It's really, really nice. It's a really good track. It's like nothing he's ever done before, or he'd ever done before, and nothing he's ever done since. It's great. It's a really, really good funky track. And then you go into the title track, Whitesnake, which is a hint of what's to come, really. If you think about tracks on the first Whitesnake album, like Take Me With You and that sort of thing, it's that sort of pace, and the lyrics are starting to get towards the sort of borderline acceptable stuff that Coverdale got onto with his "I've got a Whitesnake, I want to shake it" and all that. It's quite obvious what he's talking about. Doesn't take away from the song necessarily, but there is a very interesting clip on YouTube where he goes in a French TV program, sort of like some TV pop program, and he's on a stage with a microphone stand, and he's miming to the track Whitesnake with no band, just him and a microphone stand, and it's I won't say it's cringeworthy, but I mean the fact that he sort of managed to do it is a credit to him, really. But it's a rather odd thing to see. So if you type that into YouTube, David Coverdale Whitesnake French TV, you won't be able to understand a lot of what the French people are saying probably, but when it gets to him doing the miming to this track, it is quite amusing. We get on to side 2, and with side 2 we kick off with "Time on My Side," which apparently was written for Come Taste the Band. You can imagine it being a Deep Purple song. It's got the structure of a Deep Purple song. It's also got the structure of an early Whitesnake song. So again, it's a sign of things to come. Personally, I think it would have made a better title track than Whitesnake. I think it would have been called "Time on My Side," which he obviously had at that point. I think that would have been a much better title. It's a stronger individual track than Whitesnake, and therefore for me it would have made a better title track. After that we get "Peace Loving Man," which is a very sort of John Lennon-esque type thing really, and Coverdale just churns out an absolutely fantastic vocal on this. If you're ever in any doubt that Coverdale, if he'd been pushed in the right direction, could quite easily have become the next Rod Stewart, or even being the precursor to Michael Bolton or somebody, this is one of the tracks to prove it, because it's wonderful stuff. There's a rough version of it as well on the remastered CD, which came out, that came out about 20 odd years ago now as well. And it's worth getting for that. There's also another version, an early version of the next track, which is a track called "Sunny Days." Now that one is straight out of the Bad Company songbook. If you think of moving on from the first Bad Company album, this is Coverdale's take on that. It's similar in subject matter. It's about being on tour, moving on. Bad Company, "Sunny Days" David Coverdale. It's a real good sort of rocking track, and it's again a bit of a precursor to what you were going to get with Whitesnake, with tracks like sort of "Lie Down" and things like that. But it's a nice contrast from "Peace Loving Man." After that, you get what vocally may just be the highlight of the whole album. It's a slow ballad called "Hole in the Sky," and you could, if you wanted to, argue that it is one of Coverdale's best ever vocals. It is an absolutely wonderful, lovely, simple song. They released it as a single, but it did nothing, obviously, coming out in 1977. In amongst all that punk stuff, it just disappeared like a trace. This sort of like nice, soft, romantic track with an old rock singer singing. Oh, rock singer was only 25, but you know what I mean. Deep Purple were already being thought of as dinosaurs by then, even though they weren't that old. Then the final track on the album is a track called "Celebration." Now that is, again, it's almost like a sort of, it's almost like a sing-along jam at a party type thing. It reminds me of a track by Jim Capaldi that I can't remember the title of, but it was on one of Jim Capaldi's solo albums, and it all starts off with, they're all sort of like, they sort of like join in bit by bit, and then at one point they ask if Paul Kossoff is awake or not, or where's Kossoff, and they go, "Oh, he's asleep." And it's sort of like that, and it's almost just everybody having a good time and singing about a celebration and whatever, and it's wonderful. So this, David Coverdale's first solo album, Whitesnake, not Whitesnake, is, I think it's a hidden classic for a lot of people. A lot of people have probably totally disregarded it and thought, well, it's probably not very significant. But if you are a fan of David Coverdale's voice when he was in Deep Purple and through the earlier years of Whitesnake, not the wailing banshee stuff that we got towards the end, but the proper, good, soulful, blues-based sort of singing, this album is absolutely full of it. It's great. I also think it's got a wonderful cover as well. I love this cover. It's a really, really good cover, I think. Nice picture with the old snake on there and the snake effect stuff, or whatever. Bit of info on the back about who's on it, and also what they were liking to drink. So, as a young sort of 17-year-old reading this, it's Coverdale's fault for getting me drinking whiskey and coke back in the day, because I never heard of drinking whiskey and coke before I got this album, and then I did. So there you go. So anyway, there we go. A brief look at an album which I must have played more times than you can shake a stick at. And I'll tell you what sort of got me into doing this. There's a thread thing going around about where people are flashing up 5 albums that they've listened to over 100 times now. I've had this record for 44 years. It would be impossible for me not to have heard it far, far more than 100 times. But the trouble for me for doing that is that I think all of the sort of pre-76 Purple stuff, and probably all of the spin-offs from them up until about 1984-ish, when Purple reformed, I would have heard all of those albums at least 100 times, I think, because I played them constantly, along with the free and the Bad Company one. So it got me sort of thinking, what others are there? And it's hard to try and gauge, isn't it? Because you pick some sort of albums out and you think, well, I only played this last week. And I wish I sort of got a little piece of paper and put it in each album cover and wrote the date down every time I'd listen to it. But I used to listen to this 3 or 4 times a day sometimes, so that would have been pretty pointless. Anyway, if you haven't heard this, do yourself a favour and go out and get a listen to it. If you've heard North Winds and you like that and you think, oh, it's just going to be the same as that, it isn't. It's a little bit different to that. It's more jazzy and more funky, and it's more leaning towards Come Taste the Band than it is towards Whitesnake. So it's a perfect stepping stone if you're just now, say you're a younger person and you're just getting in to Deep Purple and Coverdale in particular and all that sort of stuff. This is a perfect stepping stone from Coverdale's career. It goes pretty much in a good sort of order. Burn, and then you go to Stormbringer, which is just starting to get a little bit more funky and soul-y in there with the influence of Glenn Hughes more than likely. And then Come Taste the Band, it's even more, but he's also, that's where he sort of tends to develop his more sort of hard rock sound as well. This one then is a sort of it's almost like he's at a crossroads and doesn't know which direction he's going to go in. Is he going to go down a soul singer route? Is he going to go down a jazzy route? Is he going to go down a hard rock route? I think by the time, less than a year later, they came to the North Winds album, I think it was pretty clear then that he was wanting to go down the more rockier route, because that is a lot rockier, a lot heavier than this one. But it's a perfect stepping stone between Come Taste the Band and Whitesnake. This one and then North Winds is a perfect sort of follow-on. So if you've not heard them, listen to them both. Don't think they've been given massive re-releases. They were re-released on CD probably about early 2000s, I think, with a couple of extra tracks on each. I think they came out on coloured vinyl a couple of years ago at ridiculously high prices, and they're very hard to get hold of, but there's no extra stuff on there at all. So if there was a good 50-year anniversary box set to be done in a couple of years of Coverdale's 2 solo albums, I think that would be pretty good, especially if there was any more stuff kicking around as well. But if you haven't heard this, go and have a listen to it. David Coverdale, Whitesnake from 1977, one of the finest solo albums to come out of the Deep Purple family.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's episode. And don't forget, it is called Whitesnake and not Whitesnake. See you soon.